Hey guys, thanks for joining Learn to Play. My name is Lance, and today we're going to take a look at Fireteam Zero. This is Play Win, an Emergent Games' newest game. It's a 1 to 4 player fully tactical strategy board game. It takes roughly an hour to 2 hours to play. In it, the players are taking on the role of a special operatives team that's sent in during World War II to handle supernatural horror events, where they'll fight monsters and complete different objectives to win scenarios. A couple of things that I really like about this game is that each player is going to have a deck of cards that they'll draw their hand from, and during their turn, they're going to play those cards in different ways to be able to defeat monsters and complete their objectives. The other thing I like about this game is with those cards, it also allows the players to be active during their friend's turn, so that it keeps you engaged no matter when you're playing, and even if it's not your turn, you still can have an active role in how the game is going. So let's head to the table and I'll teach you how to play. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is talk about setup. So you can either follow the missions in the briefing book, or you can choose one that you'd like to play as. For this demo, we're going to go ahead and look at Act 1 for the Operation Typhon's Children, River Crossing. So the first thing you're going to do is consult the briefings book and lay out the tiles based on that picture that's in the book. It's also going to list the starting location for your characters, so you can go ahead and place any characters that you're playing in that location. So we're only playing with 2 for this demo, and then the 2 specialists that are going to be coming with them. After that, it also lists the exit location, as you guys can see here on the side. Then you have to deploy your 12 random tokens, which are your spawn points, and each one of the spawn points has a number. Each tile is going to have 3 spawn points in it, and they're marked by these red dotted circles. So you just go ahead and drop a number in each one of those spaces. Once you're done with that, you'll generate your spawning pool, which is going to be 2 of the corrupted animals per hero. Since we're playing with 2, we'll have 4. And then we make our reserve pool, which is going to be 1 corrupted human, and he'll be just put off to the side, and he'll only be used when he's called for. Next, we're going to generate our twist deck, which in the description on the mission, it's going to tell us that we're going to grab the Children of Typhon deck, which is labeled at the bottom, and it also has the symbol in it. There's 8 different cards for each of the decks, so go ahead and shuffle those up, and then you'll just place them off to the side. And then we have the threat token that's on the side here as well. Each turn this is going to move up, and when we land on that first space, it's going to tell us to draw a twist card, which is going to make the game a little bit more difficult for the heroes. And then each 4 turns, we're going to add a new card. So then we move into the setup. With setup, it tells us that each one of our heroes gets to choose 1 focus action to add a special ability to their hero. So each of the classes, the marksman, leader, demolitions, and close combat, have 6 different focus action or focus abilities to choose from. So you'll go through those and choose one of those that you want your hero to have, and then you'll go ahead and put it out by your hero. Alright, so next we're going to continue following the mission briefing, and so we have the mission objective cards. With our mission, there's 2 of them that we're going to have. We're going to acquire specimen samples and repair the ferry. Each one of these objectives is going to tell us how to complete it, and it's also at the bottom of the card, it's going to list that objective's mission that it goes along with, so you can also reference that in order to pick out the different objectives you need. On the side of the card, it's also going to list what happens when that objective is completed. These can go ahead and be placed by the heroes so that they can reference them throughout the mission. After that, you're going to go ahead and make your recon deck, which you're going to grab any discovery cards that are needed listed in your mission briefing, and then it's also going to tell you how many random event cards that you'll need to draw, which are also listed at the bottom, so you can reference those. And with all the missions, you're going to need 12 cards total. So with this one, there was the 2 discovery cards, and then they told you to draw 10 random event cards. Go ahead and shuffle those up, and those are going to be used each time you perform a search in one of the locations, the spawning locations that has not been searched yet. You would draw one of these recon cards. Alright, so then you go ahead and grab the lucky coin. Make sure that it's head side face up and put that out on the table. From there, then it's time for us to put out our monsters that are part of this spawning pool. So we'll go ahead and grab the monsters that we need to put out, and then the 12-sided dice. We're going to go ahead and roll that for each monster and place them in the spawning point associated with that number. So we have a 9, a 2, a 5, and a 12. From there, then you would go ahead and choose who is going to be the first player to go, and then you're ready to start the mission. So in Fireteam 0, each round is made up of 3 different phases, and we're going to go ahead and look at each one of those phases in depth. Alright, so the first phase in each round is the tactical or tactics phase. At the beginning of this phase, the player that has the start token will give that token to the player to his left, except for the first turn, in which case we haven't gone yet, so our sergeant will be the first one to go and he'll retain that. After that, again, except for the first turn, the players may talk amongst themselves and decide whether or not one player among them wishes to play a tactical response card, which are the green tactics cards. They usually have very powerful effects, and so only one player during the turn is allowed to play those. The one condition to these is if a player has been knocked down, he may not choose to play a tactical response card from his hand. After that, then once that card has been resolved, if the players choose to play one, which they don't have to, all the players will draw back up to their starting hand size of 5 cards, except for the player that played the tactical response card. If there was one, he would not be able to draw any cards this turn. And again, with a player that has been knocked down, they can draw cards back up to their starting hand size. Alright, so now I'd like to take a look at the tile effects. So the first one are the orange lines, which identify difficult terrain. With difficult terrain, it costs heroes 2 movement points to move into them, and they have to be able to spend those points during their turn. They cannot split those points up into different turns. The difficult terrain does not affect monsters' movement. They treat those spaces as regular spaces. After that, you have the spaces that have the hash lines. These spaces are impassable terrain and cannot be moved into by heroes or monsters. After that, you have the spaces with the yellow lines, which are considered elevated positions. Any model that's on an elevated position space that takes any type of ranged attack against a model that's not on an elevated position will get their strength increased by 1, which basically means you just add 1 dice to your attack up to its maximum of 8 dice. After that, you have the purple line spaces, which are considered cover spaces. In those spaces, any model that's targeting a model that's in a purple space with a ranged attack will have its strength reduced by 1, which means that you take 1 dice away from their attack, unless they're in the same space that that figure is that they're targeting. Alright, so now we're ready to move into the second phase in the round, which is the hero phase. And during this phase, each player is going to get to activate their hero. When they activate their hero, they can perform 1 action and move up to 2 spaces in any direction, as long as those spaces are adjacent. When a hero activates, he may perform his action before he moves, after he's moved 1 space, or after he's completed his move actions. And both the move actions and the action itself are optional. He doesn't have to perform either one, or he can do one or the other. If a hero starts their turn and he happens to be knocked over, so if our sergeant started the turn and he was knocked over already, he has a choice. He can either stand up and perform his turn as normal, or he can remain knocked down and just skip his turn completely and not do anything during his hero's turn. Another thing to note is that if a hero is in the same space as a monster, he cannot voluntarily leave that space with his normal movement unless he outnumbers the monster with heroes. So in this situation, if our sergeant wanted to move away, he could do so because the heroes outnumber the monster. But if we had a situation where he was in the space with a specialist, specialists do not count towards that comparison, so he would not be able to move out of the monster's space. Now there are a couple of conditions that will affect this. The first is that if you play an event or have an event card or play a reaction card or a tactical response, those are not affected by these rules, so a hero can move out of a space even if he's outnumbered by the monsters with one of those conditions. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at movement real quick. So when a hero gets to move, they may move to any adjacent space, even a space that's only touching one side or one corner of it. So with our sergeant, he can choose to move either to this space, or this space, because it's touching the space he's on. Or another good example is if we look at the monster here, he is able to move into any of these spaces here that he's touching, even this one here that's only touching by the corners. Alright, so let's take a closer look at some of the actions the heroes can perform. They have two different options. The first one is if they're in a space that has a spawn token and there are no monsters in that space, they may perform a search action with it. So if we take a look at that, if we have the sergeant during his turn and he moves one space into this space, he can also choose to bring any of the specialists with him. So he's going to bring Patrick, and Patrick's special ability is that he allows a hero that's in a spawn space that's empty to perform a search action for free. So you would flip over the spawn token and then draw the top card from the recon deck and resolve any conditions that are on it. Once you're done with that, then our sergeant can continue by moving to another space if he chose, or he still has one action, so if he could get into range of the monster, he could actually perform an attack against that monster. Alright, so the one other thing with the search action is when you draw a recon card, if it calls for an ambush, then you would spawn a monster from the spawn pool. If your spawn pool is empty, then you would take one monster from the board that's furthest from the heroes and add it to their space. When you do that, you would activate that monster immediately, and the heroes may not play reaction cards in response to that monster's attack. So each one of our heroes has a deck that's tailored to them, and each card in that deck has two different ways it can be played. The top is the attack that you can use to perform with that card. So for example, with our we have a demolition, a melee, and a ranged attack. Each one of those is going to list the range of that attack, and it's going to show the number of dice you're going to throw with that attack. With some attacks, it's also going to give a bonus of auto damage. So with this one, you get to roll 2 dice, and you also do 2 damage right off the bat, plus whatever you roll on those dice. On the bottom side of each card is most of them will have a reaction, and you can play those during other players' turns to help them out with their attacks. Some of them can be used during your turn if it specifically says otherwise. And then the last is that you have a couple of cards in your deck that have a tactics ability on them, and you can play those as a tactical response during the beginning of a hero turn. Only one player can do this, and we'll cover this more in the player turns. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at an attack action. For this example, we're going to go ahead and move the sergeant up into this space with the specialist. So at the start of his turn, he can spend 1 point of movement to move up if he wants to. He can continue to move into the same space as the monster, but let's go ahead and take a look at his cards to see what kind of options he has. So we have a couple of attacks that have a range of 1, so he can attack from where he's at. And then the other 3 attacks have a range of 0, so he must be in the same space as the monsters to use those cards. So let's go ahead and use this one here. This one has a range of 1. You get to throw 2 dice, and it is a ranged attack that's signified by the bullet. And it also does 2 auto damage. So if we look at the corrupted animal, it has 2 hit points. But then if we come over to its resistance track, it does have a resistance of 1 to the bullets, so you must do a total of 3 damage in order to bring him down, or you can do more. So, a couple of options we have. If we would have any other bullet cards that have a range of 1, we could add those to that card to use more dice. So like if this one, since it's a bullet, if it had the same range, then we could have used it and added 3 more dice to our attack pool. Now with your attack pool, the maximum number of dice you can ever have is 8. Any more than that would be discarded. So the maximum amount of dice you can have are 8. With this one, since it doesn't have the same range, we cannot use it. So this is our only option. After we've picked our attack card, our teammates may play reactions to help us out. So if we look at the marksman, he has this bayonet charge reaction card. Unfortunately, he is out of range. This one has a maximum range of 2 spaces. If he would have been in range, he could play this, and it says before an ally performs an attack, you may reduce the target's resistance to that attack to 0. So with this card, it would cancel the 1 resistance to the bullet, and then this monster would be auto-killed because we already do 2 damage to it. But he's out of range, so we're going to have to roll. So we're going to go ahead and roll our dice and hope that we get at least 1 bullet, which we did. We got 2. So we have enough damage to kill our corrupted animal. So he gets removed from the board and added back to the spawning pool. One other thing to note is that with the corrupted animal, his special condition, it says if he is killed using bullets or bombs, all heroes in its location take 1 unblockable damage. So if we would have had another hero in here, or if we would have been in here with the monster and shot him, then we would have taken damage because of the monster's special effect. Once we have resolved the attack, whether it's successful or not, we would discard any cards that were used. And another thing to note is that you have to do enough damage in 1 shot to bring down a monster. There are no wound tokens or any way to keep track of how much damage you do to minions and elites. Bosses work a little bit differently, which we'll cover a little bit more later. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at the bosses real quick. So for this one, we're going to go ahead and look at the Cupbearer. As you can see, his stats are really nasty. And the one difference with the bosses is that they have this other thing on the side. And this says that you add 1 power token to them for each hero that's on the field, or that's playing the game. So with them, they'd add 2 power tokens. And so each time the heroes would successfully do enough damage to kill the boss, you would remove 1 of those power tokens instead. If it's the last token to be removed, then the boss has been removed and killed. Alright, so we're ready to move into the last phase in the round, which is the threat phase. So the first thing we're going to do is move the threat token 1 space on the threat track. If it lands on a draw twist card, then you would draw 1 twist card and add it to the space, and then that card will be activated immediately. Once that's done, then it's time to activate the monsters, and they will activate in a specific order, starting with minions first, and then elites, and then finally bosses. When a monster activates, we'll activate each one individually. When they activate, they have some rules that govern their movement. The first one is if a monster is in the same space as a hero, it will not move and will simply just attack the hero. Otherwise, the monster is going to move its movement value towards the closest hero that it can reach. Alright, so before we move our monster, we have to roll an activation dice for him. There's 3 different symbols on this dice. There's the monster symbol, which will allow the monster to move 1 additional space on top of its basic movement. So with our corrupted animal, he has a base movement of 2, so if he rolls the monster symbol, he gets to move 3 spaces. If he rolls the chalice symbol, he gets to activate his special ability that's next to the chalice. So his attack range would be increased by 1 if he rolls the chalice, and then they have the blank symbol, which doesn't add any effects to the monster. So let's go ahead and activate this guy here, and he rolls a chalice. So he has his range increased to 1, or by 1, so his range currently is 0, so now he has a range of 1 with his attack. From there, he's going to go ahead and move towards the closest hero that's within range. If there was heroes that were in equal distance, then he would go towards a hero that has been activated earlier in the hero's turn first, so he would go after the sergeant since the sergeant was the first one to activate. The other thing to keep in mind with the monsters is that difficult terrain does not affect their movement, but they still can't move past impassable terrain. So let's go ahead and move our monster 1 space here, because these 2 are touching, so it's adjacent, and then same here, these 2 are touching, so they're adjacent, so he'll move here. and then he's going to go ahead and perform his attack against our sergeant. So with the corrupted animal, he gets 2 dice, and he's using the bullet attack. So we're going to go ahead and roll those dice. Before we roll them, if any of our heroes wanted to play a reaction card, they could in response to the attack. They're allowed to play 1 reaction per hero, and then we go ahead and roll. Now, if we would have rolled, let's go ahead and say that we rolled this, which would have been 2 bullets, so we would have done 2 damage to our sergeant. Anytime damage is done to a hero, they must discard 1 of their action cards for each damage they take. And they get to choose, so we would go through our sergeant's cards and choose 2 cards that we wanted to discard. If at any point you have to discard cards from a hero and they don't have any cards in their hands, then they are knocked down. And we're going to cover the knockdown in just a little bit. Once our monster has done with his turn, then we move to the next monster. So let's go ahead and do this one real quick. We'd roll his activation dice. Again, he gets to add 1 range, so he'd move 2 spaces towards our heroes. He can't move into the space with the hero, but since we rolled the chalice, he now has a range of 1. So we're going to go ahead and roll our 2 dice. And again, he misses, so our hero won't take any damage from him. And then we would activate our next monster on the field until all of our minions are done. Then we would move to the elites if there are any on the field, and then finally our bosses. Alright, so now that all of our monsters have activated, the last thing we need to do in our turn is to go ahead and spawn any monsters that are in the spawning pool. This step is skipped if there is a boss present out on the field. When a boss is present, you will not spawn any new monsters from the spawning pool. Otherwise, in our turn, we ended up killing 1 monster, so we're going to go ahead and spawn him. So again, we're going to go ahead and roll the yellow dice. And we rolled a 12, so he would be spawned in that location. Now there are ways to secure locations. If a hero is in a location without any other monsters, then that location is secured. And if we would happen to roll that number on the dice, so if we would have rolled a 9, then the monster would not spawn from that location, and you would have to continue rolling that dice until you rolled a location that was not secured. Once you've spawned all the monsters that are in the spawning pool, then that round is over. Alright, so let's take a closer look at Knockdown. So as we talked about earlier, heroes have to discard action cards for every wound that they take. If a hero is required to discard more cards than he has in hand, then he would discard his hands and he'd be knocked down. When a hero gets knocked down, you would have to flip over the lucky coin to tail side. If the tail side is already up when a hero gets knocked down, then the heroes automatically lose the game. Otherwise, when a hero is knocked down, he cannot play any cards if he happens to have cards in his hand from other effects after he's been knocked down. He will not be able to take any damage for any reason, no matter what effect would affect him. During his next activation, like we've talked about, he has the choice of either standing up and performing his actions as normal, or he can stay knocked down and skip his turn and not have to worry about taking any damage. This is a good way of avoiding an endgame result if the tail side is already faced up and that hero is in a space with tons of monsters. When monsters activate, they will ignore any heroes that are knocked down. They will only target heroes that are active and that are standing up for both movement purposes and attack purposes. Alright, so this will lead us into our next thing, which is an unprotected specialist. If the last active hero in a space has been knocked down, so like in our example here with the sergeant, he was knocked down, you will have an unprotected specialist. When you have that, you will advance the threat token 1 space for each specialist that's in that space that's not protected. If it lands on a new threat or a new twist space, then you would go ahead and draw that card immediately. Alright, so there's a couple of things I'd like to cover. The first one is taking one for the team. So if you have 2 heroes in the same space when a monster performs an attack, the monster is going to attack the hero that's highest, or the first one to activate, or the highest one to activate. But A hero may choose to take one for the team, in which case then he would trade spaces and the monster would attack him instead. Now, the only conditions for this is that only heroes that are in the same space may do this, and the hero must decide to do this before the attack dice are rolled from the monster. Alright, so the other thing I want to cover are explosives. So explosives work two different ways for heroes and monsters. For heroes, if you play an explosive or demolition card, then all figures in that space are going to take damage, both heroes and monsters. If monsters perform an explosive attack or demolition attack, then only the heroes in that space are affected. Any other monsters or the monster itself will not take damage from explosive damage that it causes.